Hello everyone, my name is Nick Gaumont and I'm a music producer from Montreal, and today we are going to answer a question which comes from Darren. He asked a bunch of questions, but I'm going to focus on the first one. So, how much reverb should I be applying to different instruments/voices to make it sound good without everything turning to mush? Here we go. So, here are some what I would call beginner mistakes that I know I ran into a lot while learning how to mix. So let's look at some beginner vocal reverb mistakes. So this is what we're starting off with, some pre-processed vocals with no reverb on them. I cannot see myself living with you, living through you. So before we get started, I'd like to address the fact that a lot of you know that there is no such thing as wrong answers or mistakes in mixing music, whatever. But there are poor choices, I would say, depending on the context. So in this case, since we're dealing with vocals, the first poor choice that I would make a lot was to put the reverb directly on the vocal tracks. So this is a group track where I have both of my vocals going to this group called main vox. So what I would do back in the day, I would just put the reverb smack on it and play with the mix setting. I cannot see myself living with you, living through you. I'll fill the gaps within me of this mess. Now this can work if you're messing around with the settings and your reverb has stuff to kind of EQ or just alter the reverb in some ways. But if you want to have a really wet reverb, kind of gets hard to do that well without it sounding like garbage. Like listen what happens when I turn up the mix. I cannot see myself living with you, living through. So you hear they would get a lot of more ugly reverb sounds like woofiness and the kind of sounds from the S's and stuff like that. So in this case, for example, the high is already all the way down. So if you wanted to correct that in the reverb, then you would also be doing that on the vocals, which is probably not what you want to do. So if we want to get rid of some of the highs, or if you want to get rid of some of the woofiness, kind of raw, dry vocal starts to suffer. So in this case, that's not what we want to do. So instead of that, what you can do is you can create a send effect for your reverb. And the point of doing a send effect instead of directly on the channel is specifically so that you can alter the effect without having to compromise the main track. So this verb channel, and it has just a reverb on it with nothing else. So let's see what that sounds like now. I cannot see myself living with you, living through you. So the next kind of mistake, if you want to call it that I used to make was I would just have the send and I would not do anything else with it. But my ears now tell me that there is a lot of more work to be done. In this context, I don't want the reverb to be super audible, but I know that if I don't have it, that's not the effect that I want either. So what's bugging me now about this reverb is the high stuff, the low end information. So let's see if we can control that a bit. I would advise to listen in context because it doesn't really matter what this sounds like. If it sounds good here but it sounds bad in the mix, then no one's gonna know that and you're just wasting your time. So let's listen in context. I cannot see myself living with you, living through you. Now in reverb we don't really need the low end either, so let's get rid of a bunch of that. I cannot see myself living with you. So there's kind of some woofy stuff going in there too. I see myself. I don't really like that, so let's get rid of that.
I cannot see myself living with you. I cannot see myself living with you, living through.
So I still want some of the high end, but I don't want it all the time. And there's definitely some parts in this particular vocal where there's a buildup, and that is definitely going to be when there are S's. So if we focus on a part that has some S's, you'll see that when he says C, there's going to be a buildup here somewhere.
Cannot see myself live.
So you want to kind of set it where that kind of buildup starts on the S's.
Cannot see myself live.
Then you can decide how much you want to get rid of it.
Cannot see myself living with you.
In this case, I want to keep some of that high stuff. I just want to control it.
Cannot see myself living with you. Cannot see myself. Cannot see myself. Cannot see myself living with you. Living through you.
So the next thing that I want to do is not necessarily a mistake, but back in the day when I would want to hear more of the reverb, I thought that what I had to do was to increase the time or the decay time, but there's a better way to do that. You can just kind of turn up the reverb tails with some compression.
Cannot see myself living with you. Living through you.
See how that feels like the tail is longer, but that's just because it's louder for longer. The tail is actually exactly the same length.
I cannot see myself living with you. I cannot see myself living with you. Living through you.
Now at this point it might feel like there's no reverb anymore and you can't hear it, but that's kind of what I want. There are audible kinds of reverb, and then there's also reverb that is kind of more functional, and I'm kind of aiming for the more functional one where I'm kind of just making the vocal a bit bigger and like widening it a bit. If you're not really focusing too hard, it doesn't sound like this vocal is super wet, but look what happens when we turn the reverb off.
Cannot see myself living with you, living through you.
So you can see that taking it off definitely does make a big difference.
I cannot see myself living with you.
So there are a couple other tips that I like that are not necessarily related to mistakes, but if you're finding that the reverb is kind of obscuring your vocal a bit too much,
I cannot see myself living with you.
what you can do is you can use the pre-delay to let the starts of words kind of have a little bit more breathing room before the reverb kicks in.
I cannot see myself living with you, living through. I cannot see myself living with you, living through you.
So it kind of just gives the vocal a bit more space. And the last thing that I want to share is also not necessarily a mistake, but something that just didn't occur to me for a long time, and I'm sure might not have occurred to you yet either. Maybe it took you a long time to realize this too. There's nothing that tells you that you have to keep the reverb send level or the reverb volume level at the same time, at the same level the whole time, which means that you can automate that if you want to. So automating the volume of the reverb send itself, so you can turn it up when there's kind of silence in the vocals or when you want to hear the reverb specifically, but you want to kind of carve out some room when you don't really need to hear the reverb. So something like this.
I cannot see myself living with you, living through you.
So it's super subtle, but mixing is kind of like a bunch of a series of tiny moves that really just add up over time. So in the case of this, kind of getting the reverb tails to stick out a bit more, you could also do that with a more hands-off approach with like some plugins that can do like ducking or stuff like that, or like a side chaining, so that when the raw vocals are going on, then the reverb turns down and then you hear it in the silences, kind of like what I did with the automation here, but in a more hands-off kind of way and potentially faster. But with this automation stuff, you get exactly what you want. So this is by no means a comprehensive list of beginner vocal mistakes, but those are some of the ones that came to mind. If there are any other problems that you're running into, let me know in the comments and I'll help you if I know the answer to those questions. Otherwise, Google is your friend. My name is Nick Gaumont. I'm a music producer in Montreal. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.